Okay, it's completely fine. Welcome Shalu, welcome Radha, Abhishek, Sunny, welcome all of you. Yeah. So let me clear it out. What's the purpose of this series and how we are going to go ahead in this particular session. All of you know the importance of contemporary issues, right? And you already know the importance of China on India's foreign policy radar. And generally students think international relations is about learning about the current events because that is what you see in the news, right? But the events are like waves. For having right understanding and application in the answer scenario, in a question scenario, for that what you need is a broader perspective, a background. In this particular live session, I am going to focus on the background, the discussion. In the next session, we are going to know how you can actually use this knowledge into questions and how you can mold a answer. Okay? So coming to the Chinese Communist Party. So this is going to be the lecture flow. It means we are going to start with the China 100 years celebration. So where is China as of now? And what is the achievement of this Chinese Communist Party? Then we are going to talk about CCP and its tumultuous journey. And within this, I am going to talk about Mao. I am going to talk about Deng Xiaoping. And then I am going to talk about Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping, current head of the state, commander-in-chief of PLA. So we are going to know what changes we can observe in Xi's views and actions from the previous leaders. And that is how you can understand the whole picture or the story of this Chinese Communist Party. Okay? China's story can be covered if you know about the three leaders. Number one, Mao Zedong, the hero of the revolution, who is credited for creation of PRC, People's Republic of China. Then we have Deng Xiaoping, and then we have Xi Jinping. So we are starting this session from core idea that the Chinese history is actually based on the role of these three leaders. And in the end, I'm going to categorize these phases and how these phases and within these phases their contribution actually altered the whole trajectory. Okay, and there are certain fundamental differences between the core ideas of these leaders. Okay, so first of all, July 1921, the time when Chinese Communist Party was formed in Shanghai, China. Shanghai, whose picture is altered altogether when it comes to now, but there was the different Shanghai at that time, right? And at the 100th year celebration, China is giving a message to the world that China is having a stability within state and government, and with a unison, they are telling the world, we are here to become a global power. So it is actually symbolizing that this particular event is an achievement. But to understand Chinese Communist Party, we have to question on this particular fact, whether you can actually consider it an achievement or it's an overstated statement. Okay, we have to know that. Recently, Xi Jinping made a statement, and that was a clear threat to some scholars. So according to Xi Jinping, if West is trying to intervene or limiting the Chinese expansion, then it is like that West is actually fighting with a great wall of steel. Okay, so it means this particular speech was actually telling that yes, Chinese Communist Party and the government is facing some turmoil as of now. As you are going to know the story of Xi Jinping, you will actually understand how Xi Jinping is using two-pronged strategy. He is using hyper nationalism and he is using threat from the outside world. In his speech, he was saying that West is not happy with the prosperity which China is having and how China is actually converting this prosperity into power. So, don't you think these kind of tactics are used to actually legitimize, or you can say gather more power by the ruling regime? Similar kind of things can be actually called for this CCP. Few things for which we can actually say yes, Chinese Communist Party has achieved. For example, you can take example of this COVID. It is said that it originated from a lab in Wuhan, and there are many stories, right? But the point is, China actually successfully countered the wave of this COVID. And if we compare the efforts of Chinese government with other large countries, we can say yes, that's an achievement. But at the same time, we can say there are some reasons for which China is criticized. Number one being that yes, they have countered their wave. They have actually facilitated vaccination at a faster pace. When it comes to the medical kits, they were the one who were producing the most at that time. But the point is the way they handled the response to the world community, it actually went negative. Okay, and another achievement was in this period, China was actually having growth, economic growth. When world was on slump, China was growing, and the reason was its manufacturing sector, who was actually supporting the needs of the world. You can take example of oxygen concentrators, PPE kits. So all of these were being produced and exported by this Chinese party. Another crisis which can be observed before this Chinese Communist Party is what is going in Hong Kong, the issue of Uyghur Muslims. And for this, Chinese party has actually had a strong posture. One posture is that you say that yes, we are going to find a middle path. We are going to have talks. But this is not the posture which Chinese Communist Party is having as of now. Some of you might have this question in mind, why sir is using the word Chinese Communist Party for actions which are expected from a government. So there's a difference between a party and government. For those who are thinking like this, that you are actually using your knowledge of Indian political system to visualize what is happening in China. But to know the political culture of China, you should understand how things work in China. So there was a time, especially in 1970s, when there was actually a separation to some extent. Although Communist Party being the leading party, ruling party, but there was a difference in the roles which were given to government and the roles which were given to party. But when we talk about current time, there's actually fusion between the two. Xi Jinping is heading the party. Xi Jinping is heading the government. Xi Jinping is heading the army, defense forces. So as of now, there's a fusion between the two. And that is why we are using the word CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Okay? Chinese Communist Party is actually using propaganda mechanism, and this propaganda mechanism is not like they're actually restricting media and using specific media houses sponsored by government. No, these are not the only thing. There's a specific department, United Front Worker Department, UFWD. This is the propaganda arm of Chinese Communist Party. As of now, it is also regarded as magic weapon of China. And why I'm using the word magic weapon? Because this particular department is actually funding many NGOs, other civil society groups, and taking support from Chinese diaspora overseas in US, Australia, New Zealand, British, everywhere. This department is having links. Now some of you might think, so what is the harm in links? It is not just the links that this department is developing. This department is actually funding these NGOs, civil society groups, media outlets, some of the businessmen, partnering with some of the Chinese businessmen, so that they can actually interfere or have some influence in foreign countries. And the ultimate objective is how interest of Chinese Communist Party can be fulfilled through these links. So actually Xi Jinping was in a tussle with Donald Trump, considering you must have heard about trade war. At that time, one more thing happened. At the time, Donald Trump had a crackdown on Confucius institutions in USA. Confucius, a famous philosopher of China, and a large amount of people actually follow Confucianism. That actually resembles tolerance, peace. Then why Donald Trump actually cracked down on those institutions in US? The reason was these institutions were having link with this department, and this department was funding those institutions so that they can indoctrinate Chinese as well as others in US, so that they can actually favor the Chinese overview of the world or Chinese view of the world. And yes, there's a difference between Chinese view of the world and the US view of the world. And that is the one point which we have to understand in this session. We are just starting. Soon we are going to talk about the evolution, and then you are going to actually know how Chinese view was taking shape in 1920s. What change came later. So there is a difference in the view. Okay. US actually banned this Chinese propaganda. A specific act was actually introduced. Okay. It was alleged that this propaganda arm of Chinese Communist Party is actually doing political funding in certain elections. For example, in Australia, if think tanks, NGOs, businessmen supported by this UFWD are actually funding parties or ruling parties of other nations, don't you think by this way they are going to influence the policies of these nations, right? So this is what China is doing now. Now, coming to the story of CCP. So how CCP actually formed? हो क्या रहा था उस time पे? So to understand the evolution of CCP, we have to go back to the history, and especially World War I. So as World War I was ending in 1918, so what happened? There was Treaty of Versailles, and all of you know what happened with Germany to this Treaty of Versailles, right? There was economic, and political, every kind of, you can say, turmoil in Germany, and which actually gave space for the emergence of Hitler. You know that. Now, what Treaty of Versailles has to do with China? That is the question. Actually, under this treaty, one area, Shandong, this was given to Japan. Although China was on the winning side, but still, Britishers and other powers, they had this arrangement that we are going to give this to Japan. And the reason was because Japan forces actually freed this particular area from the influence of enemy. This particular action actually was considered as a humiliation of China. At that time, many young students of Peking University, they came together and there was a huge procession. So at that time, people were coming together and saying government of the time, the Chinese government of the time is weak. So what happens when people consider their own government weak? Don't you think this is the time where we actually have political vacuum? So this political vacuum was observed by Mao Zedong and 12 of his actually comrades. So that is when Mao Zedong, along with his other comrades, established Chinese Communist Party, and this was July 1921. So in this photo is Mao Zedong and his first wife. But it was not an easy road like any other success story. It has, always there are some turmoils which you have to handle, right? At the time, the leading political party of China was Kuomintang, which was also called CNP, Chinese Nationalist Party. And all of you know that, and if you don't know, just listen to me now. Since Mao was actually making a communist party, so the core idea of communism is against nationalism. And some of you might be surprised with this fact. Why then Xi Jinping is using hyper-nationalism if core idea of communism is against nationalism? This is the unique political identity of China. We are going to know about this in the new upcoming slides. But the point here is the ruling party was CNP, and Mao Zedong wanted to seize power from this party. So CNP actually started a crackdown against this Chinese Communist Party because there was an existential crisis over CNP, and whenever you have existential crisis, what you do? You put a crackdown on the enemy. So that is why we saw this long march where these cadres of Chinese Communist Party actually went into Xinjiang, Sichuan province, and finally they reached Yan'an. Means they were running for their own safety. Okay, and this event is called Long March, June 1935. Then finally, what happened? At once, this CNP was actually cracking down this Chinese Communist Party. But soon what happened? These CNP and Chinese Communist Party were fighting together against Japan. And this was the time of World War II. And finally, what happened? Japan was defeated. So we started this Chinese Communist Party's role in China as an opponent of CNP. Then keeping in mind that Japan is having incursions into Chinese territory, now we have to fight together against the foreigner. Later we are going to resolve our issue. So when this Japan was defeated, this civil war started. Means at one side there was Chinese Communist Party and then CNP. And we saw a 20-year-long civil war. And finally, who won that war? It was CCP, Chinese Communist Party. And a major credit was given to Mao Zedong for his military strategy, for his statesmanship, and that is how Mao Zedong became the leader of People's Republic of China. Before that, China was called Republic of China. So when Mao Zedong won, they actually pushed this Kuomintang and the leader Chiang Kai-shek to an island known as Taiwan. So as of now, China does not actually recognize Taiwan as a separate country. Okay, so that is the issue, because they say it is a Chinese territory, but Taiwan say no, we are an independent nation. If I tell you about the success of this Mao Zedong by actually making China a communist China, we cannot nullify the contribution of USSR. At one point, Mao Zedong was like a blue-eyed boy of Stalin. He used to read a lot about Stalin, and he was actually given space by Stalin so that he can actually reside in the terrains of USSR when CNT was running for his life. And Stalin wanted to nurture Mao Zedong so that he can be used to bring influence of communism in China as well as in Korean War. But after Stalin, when Nikita Khrushchev came as the head of USSR, Mao had differences with USSR. And the reason was Nikita Khrushchev wanted a peaceful existence with West. So Mao was not ready for that, because according to Mao, how can a counter view, means capitalism, exist in this world if we are saying that capitalism is the sole enemy of equitable society? So it is the ultimate aim of communism to wipe out capitalism. Then how can we think about this peaceful existence? And it was this period when USSR and China were not having cordial relations. Then actually Mao Zedong took two major steps. One was Great Leap Forward and another was Cultural Revolution. So what do you think? They were actually you can consider them an achievement in Chinese history, or they were massive failures? If you just search Great Leap Forward, then you will find subtitle Disaster. So what was Great Leap Forward and what was Cultural Revolution and what it has to do with Chinese Communist Party? Mao Zedong actually started this Great Leap Forward. So what is the reason behind it? Just listen to it. Mao Zedong was in need of capital to push industrialization, because for pushing industrialization you need capital. So what one thing Mao did is collectivization of agriculture. So what was collectivization of agriculture? Chinese society, which was predominantly a peasant society, was actually converted into communes. So private right to have this land ownership was disbanded. And why it was disbanded? Mao thought, why not actually make collection of lands, and when these farmers now are going to do this farming, and the output is going to be collected by state. So now state means government is going to purchase agriculture output at cheaper price from these farmers, considering the living cost is quite low in countryside of China. Then government is going to sell this production, agriculture production, at higher price. So what Chinese government is going to have is a capital, a huge capital in between this trade. So now this capital is going to be used for pushing industrialization. So one factor was this, one step was this in this Great Leap Forward. Another was that they started that every countryside Chinese should start local industry. It was like localization of industry. You should have blast furnaces in the back door to start production. So if you are pushing for industrialization, that too at the local level, without any mechanization of this industry, what is going to happen? The output would be of poor quality. Do you think that output would sustain the need of market? No, that cannot sustain the need of market. More than 10 million Chinese died during this great leap forward because it led to famine. Why? Because these officers who were responsible for collecting this production from this from the farmers, they actually inflated the output. They said yes, we are having output, because they were not having courage to say the reality in front of Mao Zedong. So a big chunk was taken away from farmer so that they can tell about the achievement of government to Mao Zedong, and this farmer were left with a feeble production. And when there was drought hit, and what happened? The farmer was not having enough food. So that is why it is considered a major failure. Then in the 1960s, there was a political crisis in front of Mao Zedong. At this point, his opponents were his own party workers who were having some political aspirations and were not quite happy with the disaster which Mao created. He was actually selling dreams to Chinese people, but the dreams were actually turned out to be poisonous, right? Now what Mao did? Mao started cultural revolution. Mao said, this Chinese Communist Party has actually turned into a hub of capitalists. Can you imagine the courage of Mao Zedong? He's saying his own party has become a hub of capitalists. So what message he was trying to convey to the people? He was saying that communist dream of prosperity, of equality is under threat because some of my colleagues, some of these communist party leaders have become beneficiaries as well as supporters of these capitalists. So at this point, there was a massive increase in the power of Mao Zedong. And the massive increase can be considered from this fact that a huge amount of youth actually became Red Guards. Those who were given the responsibility to bring or sustain this cultural revolution and weed out any supportive literature, any supportive person, any supportive, any text should be removed from China, because it is restricting, because Mao Zedong was saying it is restricting your prosperity equality. So these Red Guards, along with People Liberation Army, PLA, the army of China, they started crackdown against their own officers, who were actually supporting or having ideas of capitalism, crackdown on many communist leaders, crackdown on many writers, artists. So that is what happened in cultural revolution. A lot of people died. So this picture actually resembles the time when people are together, they are burning some literature which was actually having some counter views or Western perspective. And there is an interesting fact here. The current president of China, Xi Jinping, his father was a prominent communist leader, a prominent leader of Chinese Communist Party. And during Cultural Revolution, his father was purged. His father was labeled that he is counter-revolutionary, means he is against the revolution. So he was followed by Red Guards and army, and he was labeled as as an enemy of state. So Xi Jinping, the present president, at that time he was a small boy and young boy, and he was living in Beijing, between the political cloud. So he actually, he was groomed in between the power circles of Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping. But when his father was labeled as an enemy, he actually went to a small countryside village, and there he actually, served some time, and then finally he came back to university, Tsinghua University. And an interesting fact here, not connected to Chinese Cultural Revolution. So there was a documentary on Chinese view, Chinese global view, and how Xi Jinping is actually bringing forth revolution. So if Xi Jinping is bringing forth revolution, then it becomes important what is in his history. So in the documentary, there's an interesting, you can say, interesting story that when this scholar, they reached out to the village in which a considerable amount of time was spent by Xi Jinping. The lady in that village who remembers Xi Jinping, she is in late 80s, she said, yeah, I remember him. He was called Qi Ku. So in Chinese, Qi Ku means a person who can actually eat the bitterness. Jo kadwahat ko kha jaye. That is Qi Ku. Okay, that was a name or title which was actually for he was known by this title in that village. So you got a new name of Qi Ku, or meaning of Qi Ku. Now, so Mao actually brought this cultural revolution to dispel any dissent in his party, right? That was the purpose. So he actually came to power by actually making himself and establishing himself as a cult personality. Means people across the China was following and considering that he is having charismatic personality and he is having solution to all the problems of China. So this is the story which I shared with you as of now. Now, in late 1960s and when 1970s entered, we saw that cloud of Mao Zedong was on decline due to massive failures of Great Leap Forward and this cultural revolution. Finally, Mao died and his place was taken by Deng Xiaoping. And he was a different kind of leader. He changed the trajectory of China and brought economic liberalization and new political options. And in this picture, you can see former US President Jimmy Carter, and actually having, this particular event signifies the point where US agreed to establish diplomatic office in China. And at that time, Deng Xiaoping and China were considered blue-eyed boy of West. It's the second time I'm using this reference. Why? Because West wanted territories where communist influence can be decreased. If a communist country is opening up for a capitalist economic culture, then it's an ideological win for USA, because USA was heading the banner of capitalism. One is that. Second is, companies of West, means here USA, wanted a territory where they can actually manufacture goods at a cheaper rate. So who can provide that better other than China? China, because whatever policy Chinese Communist Party is going to make, that will be implemented across the China. There will be no dissent, nothing. So having this Chinese Communist Party, complete rule was actually beneficial for many Western nations and companies. They supported Deng Xiaoping's idea and guided Deng Xiaoping about the liberalization and restructuring Chinese economy. But it was not like Deng Xiaoping copy-pasted whatever advice was given by West. Deng Xiaoping actually started state capitalism. Means state will be the sole power, but state will bring capitalism on its own condition. It won't be like the capitalism in liberal countries where you open the market. Now it is the market forces who determine the expansion of capitalism. But this is not the case. This was not the case in China. Okay, and this is not the case even now. Okay, so this was regarded as second revolution. Deng Xiaoping coming to the power and liberalizing economy of China. It was 1978. So after this series of economic reforms, we saw that Chinese economic might increased. Huge expenditure was done on infrastructure, establishing special economic zones where many of the foreign companies were establishing their base, building products in China and exporting them. And China was not even charging custom duty from these companies. The problem was solved for companies. They were actually producing goods in Chinese territory, taking raw material into Chinese territory, producing goods and selling out without giving custom duty. So they were at win situation. So what China was getting? China was getting investment. So they were not getting custom duty, but if that factory is earning profit, then tax will be leveled on profit. And that was quite fine because anyhow they have to give tax or they hire in Western countries. So this is how Xi Jinping led this restructuring of Chinese economy, and due to which China is now the second largest economy after USA. Right? If China was getting economic prosperity, do you think everything was fine in China? No. Because economic growth is different from development. Economic growth may indicate that yes, China was having huge production and foreign companies had a huge role in that. But when it comes to countryside China, when it comes to central China, northern China, there was huge poverty, right? And this Chinese Communist Party's influence was not giving enough space to the people where they can actually, show their dissent. And that is why we saw this event, Tiananmen Square, where there were pro-democracy protests. I think you must have seen this picture, right? One man is standing in front of these tanks. This picture has become a sign of dissent across the world. So when these tanks were marching into the Tiananmen Square, this man stayed in front of this tank. Then tank tried to change its trajectory. Then that man finally, that man was not going away. So he finally, stood up he actually jumped on this tank, and finally we don't know what happened to this man, but this man became the symbol of dissent. So pro-democracy protests were there in China. And what do you think? Don't you think Western countries had something to do from here? Some people think if Western countries were benefited by Chinese economic potential, which was giving benefit to the many of the Western companies, Western nations companies, then what more West wanted? West wanted political reforms. And that is why it is said that CIA actually trained many agents in Taiwan, brought them into the mainland China, established certain units in China so that they can do this pro-democracy protest. Bring consciousness among people that they have more rights than what Chinese government is giving them. Right? So these were the turmoils or challenges which were in front of the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. So what achievement we can say what Chinese Communist Party have in terms of its fight against poverty? There is a record which says 800 million people were actually taken out from poverty. That's an achievement of CCP, and credit should be given to Deng Xiaoping. It actually brought back the legitimacy of CCP, which was in crisis during Mao's era, because we saw Great Leap Forward and Chinese Cultural Revolution. Now, when it comes to Deng to Hu Jintao, means after Deng Xiaoping, there was another leader, Hu Jintao. We saw that this you can say the Chinese Communist Party's ideological static, this particular posturing of Chinese Communist Party was actually having some openings for reform. I won't say it reformed, but it was having certain openings for reform. So at this point, many Western scholars, they gave this analysis that we saw in 1978 that China liberalized economy. They actually, they did this, fortune telling, bhavishyavani, that soon we are going to see China is going to bring political reforms, pro-liberal reforms, and we are going to see China turning into democracy like we see in the West. There's no other solution before China, because people cannot satisfy just by economic reforms. Because with economic reforms means people are getting more money, better opportunities. It is also bringing integration of China with the world in terms of economy as well as ideas. As Chinese people are going to become empowered, they will start questioning the Chinese regime for more parties, so that more people can actually come into politics. They are going to demand more civil rights, because that is what empowered people do. So West thought that. But nothing like this actually happened. Because in Hu Jintao's time, it was like, yeah, some political opening is coming, right? And we are going to see the eventual transition to democracy. But this never happened. Hu Jintao did not do this political reform. And when we saw Xi Jinping, he actually altered for whatever was made or contributed by Deng Xiaoping as a measure to restrict the chances of authoritativeness. These were quashed by Xi Jinping. So you can simply understand it like this. During the Mao's time, Mao did these blunders, right? Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution. How Mao did this? There were many advisors, but why? Because Mao became larger than party. Mao became larger than any debate. So debates are necessary to achieve better option. So during the time of Deng Xiaoping, what Deng Xiaoping did, he bring a system of collective leadership. So what was collective leadership? The highest body of Chinese Communist Party, Politburo, was also having stakes in making key decisions. But during Xi Jinping, the system of collective leadership was abolished. And that is why this transition never happened. According to Xi Jinping, this collective leadership was an idea because so that Mao kind of thing never happened. Whatever Mao was doing, that never happened. But the point is, when too many people come into discussion, take responsibility, then sometimes it is regarded as it is no one's responsibility. Failure is no one's responsibility. Success is everyone's credit. So Xi Jinping took this chance. He did not want it, to slow the process of Chinese growth, because when there is this process, this may lead to sluggishness in China's growth. That was the idea Xi Jinping actually had. And that is why it becomes important that we should understand how CCP makeover happened during the Xi Jinping time. All of you know that Xi Jinping was groomed in the power circles of Communist Party, right? So when this demand was actually raised of political reform, so Xi Jinping was not clearly saying that his power is going to increase soon. He was not saying that there will be no scope of this political reform. But the point is, actually political reforms were thrown out. Okay, and even there was a reverse process. Okay, so what happened? Political liberalization turned out to be a short affair, because once Xi Jinping took over, he took the control, and Xi actually abandoned the doctrine of Deng Xiaoping. So Deng Xiaoping used to say this: hide your strength and bide your time. It means if you want to grow, hide your strength. Because if China shows its strength, then others will become insecure. And if others become insecure, if others means at that point, Deng Xiaoping was talking about Western power. When others become insecure, they will become hurdle. And China's growth story don't want any hurdle. Bide your time, take your time. You should reach to an extent where you are so, you're a great economic path, and then you can, take steps to show that you are having strength in other areas as well. But before that, don't show your strength. But Xi Jinping said, time of that ideology or this idea is over. Now it's the time when China should actually prove that we are going to convert this prosperity into power. That China cannot be symbol of just prosperity. We have shown the world that you cannot relate socialism with poverty only. Because after the disintegration of USSR, failure of USSR, the economic turmoils of USSR in 1991, which finally led to disintegration of USSR, West was propagating that if you talk about socialism, there will be poverty. So China proved that there is a unique model which China is following. We are a communist country with capitalist economy. So we are a rich socialist country. We are bringing growth and we are doing redistribution. So now is the time to use it to actually getting proved our geopolitical power. So he said that Chinese economic model is unique in itself. It means the world has an alternative. Because after World War II, and especially in 1991, after World War II, US became the hegemony, having this bipolar world order in which USSR on one side and USA on other side. And after 1991, it was USA. World was thinking the ways of USA doing business, doing politics are the best ways. Because US won, USSR disintegrated. And even after disintegration, when Gorbachev was gone and Yeltsin came to the power in newly formed Russia, Yeltsin also embraced capitalism in economy. So it was proved that capitalism is the best way, free market is the best way. But Xi Jinping said, no, You have other alternative, which is Chinese model. So when China is saying we are successful by a new model, which is having Chinese characteristics, it means by this particular attempt, Xi Jinping wanted ideological strength of China to expand in other countries as well. USA became powerful not just by its economic strength. USA also became powerful due to its ideological strength, saying that whatever I am doing is the best way. That is how influence is propagated. Similarly, Xi Jinping is trying to actually expand the strength of China or influence of China. So here you can see Kai Xia. So Professor Kai Xia was actually professor in Chinese Communist Party school. Yes, Chinese Communist Party has a special school, a college, which is there to train the leaders about working of Chinese government, about politics, about world affairs. So Kai Xia has actually taught many of the current leaders, ministers of Chinese Communist Party. And last year, in August 2020, she was expelled from Chinese Communist Party after contribution of so many years. So why she was expelled? She said that Xi Jinping has changed the nature of Chinese Communist Party. Our topic is 100 years of Chinese Communist Party. So just look at the trend, how Chinese Communist Party is changing. Kai Xia said, as of now, the structure of Chinese Communist Party is weakened in terms of having diverse ideas. As of now, this Xi Jinping has actually captured the whole Communist Party of China. And he has done it very skillfully. How? Xi Jinping has removed every dissent or everyone who actually tried to challenge the idea of Xi Jinping. So those members, those opponents were removed from Chinese Communist Party. So he has actually established a degree of autonomy. And this party has come under the heavy hand of Xi. So Xi Jinping is now poster boy of Chinese Communist Party as well as Chinese government. So he has actually changed everything for which Deng Xiaoping stood. And when I say everything, it means I'm talking about the structure of Chinese Communist Party. So Xi actually has systematically dismantled the collective leadership. I told you what collective leadership is. It means the members of Politburo are also going to have say in the affairs of government. As of now, how China works actually, Xi Jinping has created small groups from this Chinese Communist Party, and majority of these groups are headed by Xi Jinping. There is a special group in Chinese Communist Party on the affairs of South China Sea, and it is headed by Xi Jinping. So every decision is taken by this group. Means other leaders, other senior leaders of Chinese Communist Party are not taken into consideration, or there's no dialogue with other leaders. These groups headed by Xi Jinping, they actually do the research, they brief Xi Jinping about the possible repercussions, and that's how decisions are being taken under Xi Jinping. It means we can say the current rule of Xi Jinping is authoritarian in nature, right? So Xi Jinping has not only ensured himself as title of core leader, he has actually become party chief, head of the government and commander-in-chief. And there are two things which he is using: hyper nationalism and collective anxiety. He is creating anxiety among the people. It's a rule. Whenever a regime is in crisis, people question it. So the best way to consolidate your power is to make these people aware about the threats and projecting that you are the person who is having strength to counter those threats. And I hope you can relate to some of the examples in Indian politics too. What Xi Jinping did, he actually proved in media that China is having potential threat from India, because India is having border infrastructure and that is actually against Chinese sovereignty. Now, many Western powers are actually colliding with each other to actually dismantle the economic and geopolitical strength which China is having. And fuel has been given by West itself to Xi's strategy. He wants to prove to the people that your livelihood is in threat, your livelihood is in threat, your pride is in threat. So Xi Jinping is using pride. So how he is using, you can take example of G7 summit. So in international relations, it is not just about one article, okay? It is about connecting threads across issues. In G7, what Biden said, Biden clearly said that China is a threat to the West. West has to come together to actually restrict China. 2 days back, look what Italian PM said. They have actually, Italy has reached out to India for a trilateral partnership between Italy, India and Japan, and clearly saying that we are against the China's assertiveness, China's expansionist policies, and we believe in Quad initiative. We believe in free Indo-Pacific area, which we cannot have under the hegemony of China. So now Chinese media is circulating these comments again and again, because these are the events which are happening as of now. These are the statements coming from the leaders of the West. So what do you think Chinese people will do? Chinese people will rally behind Xi Jinping. Do whatever you want to do, because you are our savior. You are going to make China great. So he is selling the Chinese dream. This is a technique called Salami slicing technique, which China is using. Salami slicing technique, and this particular phrase was also used by Mr. Bipin Rawat, CDS, Chief of Defence Staff. He said what China is doing. China is using this strategy, and this is the communist strategy. For expanding their territory, what they do, they stake claim on the existing territory, and they actually make multiple claims. Look what China did. In northern part, in Ladakh, they are claiming the territory. In northeast, they are claiming the territory, and they are saying these territories belong to us, because we don't actually accept the territorial boundaries of India, which were actually made by Britishers. So these are our territories, although these territories don't belong to them. Xi Jinping already knows this, but why they are doing this? If you stake claim on others' territory, and again on different platforms you keep this point straight, yes, this is our territory, this is our territory, this is our territory. Now international community will recognize that territory as disputed territory, because you have claimed so much. Now that's a disputed territory. Now what is going to happen? Now China is going to give us offer. We are going to give up our claim on northeastern part. We are going to give up our claim on Arunachal Pradesh. But for this, you have to concur with our claims in Ladakh. तो ये तो वो वाली बात हो गई हमारी टेरिटरी, चाइना ने कहा नहीं मेरी है मेरी है मेरी है, जगह जगह फैला दिया. एंड नाउ दे आर सेइंग व्हाट ऑप्शन डू यू वांट? यू वांट दिस टू बी सेटल्ड amicably, you want it peace, then just give us one territory and we are giving up our claim on this territory. अरे भाई पहले से ही ये झूठ है. This is a faulty claim. Your logic is faulty. And in politics, there's no, complete truth and there's no complete false. Only scopes are actually, scope is try to search ki which scope can be used to alter the narrative on this particular issue. So China is using the scope of territorial boundaries settled by imperial power, and China, since China is communist, so communists are against imperialism. That is what Xi Jinping is trying to do. That we are against imperialism, and that is why we are not going to settle for the boundary which was settled by imperial British powers. So China is saying to the people of China that it is not just about a territory. It is about the core ideology on which China stands. That is communism, and communism is against imperialism because imperialism is highest form of capitalism. That is what said by Lenin. So from this point, from this connection, remember, Xi Jinping is bringing Marxism and Leninism back into Chinese Communist Party's ideology. So I hope you got the story until now. If you got this, mention yes in comments. Let me check the comments. Just mention yes in comments. Great. So now the story which I shared until now, you can say this is the gist of that story. What China is trying to do. China is actually, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, it is spreading its influence in the neighborhood as well as afar, means in Europe. You can take example of BRI, OBOR. So what are these? These are Chinese strategy to expand its reach. And how China is doing that? China is doing that by actually using the fruits of structural reforms which were done in 1978. China is doing checkbook diplomacy. Means giving loan to these developing nations to build infrastructure, and saying once you take a loan, you build infrastructure, you connect with this One Belt One Road initiative, you will see huge investment pumping in, you will have more tax revenue, you will have more jobs, so everything would be great. But many of the nations are coming under the debt of China. And former chief of IMF, Ms. Christina Lagarde, she said what China is doing is neo-colonialism. So it is not just an influence, it is neo-colonialism. So these are the systematic strategy and pathways, multiple pathways which China is using as of now. As of now, even private companies are under the influence of Chinese Communist Party. Means Chinese Communist Party leaders are member of boards who are responsible for taking decision. I hope you are aware about what happened with this Ant Corporation. How many of you remember this Ant Corporation going on IPO? And then there was a crackdown of Chinese Communist government. And for many days, we did not saw where is Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba and Ant Corporation, right? So these companies are under CCP's radar. This is Chinese Communist Party now. And as of now, surprising element is, as of now, this Chinese Communist Party is, empowered to use resources of Chinese government. More than, around $10 billion per year is allowed to be spent by Chinese Communist Party on their, propaganda work, on, actually deepening the ties of Chinese Communist Party across the world. So these resources are being utilized. So for influence operations abroad. So can you actually think similar kind of thing happening in India? BJP using government funds? No. They have own funds, right? There are alternate routes, corporates pumping in funds in our political parties. We have different kind of democracy, right? But the point here is they can do this because Chinese Communist Party is the party, or you can say Chinese Communist Party is the China as of now. So I told you about the work of magic weapon. So it is not a new department. It existed in the earlier years of Chinese Communist Party. Means I'm talking about evolution. I'm talking about the years when Mao Zedong was in fight with Kuomintang. At that time, this particular department, propaganda wing, was used to actually use people, turn them against this CNP. So it was having a great contribution. Actually, Mao Zedong at that time got the pulse of peasantry. So what Mao did? He called for peasants to fight for their land against this CNP. So that is why there was no dearth of manpower for Mao Zedong. But after this Mao Zedong, when Deng Xiaoping came, we saw a bit decline in the usage of UFWD. But in the time of Xi Jinping, this UFWD has gained a lot, and a major work has been given to UFWD. I've given you example how NGOs, civil society groups, many businessmen, many think tanks are being tied with this UFWD funding, and how they're influencing or expanding influence of China in other countries. I gave you example of Australia, I gave you example of US. Now, I want to share some of the insights of this book. So, in this book, Xi Jinping's time is being regarded as the great regeneration of the Chinese nation. And why this great regeneration? Because Xi Jinping is projecting that new era has begun in China. So he himself, through his tactics, got the status where he is regarded as the third prominent leader in Chinese Communist Party history. First being Mao, then Deng Xiaoping, and then Xi Jinping. So in this book, it is said that it is the fourth phase of Communist Party's evolution, which we are having as of now. So first phase was, it's a kind of revision, 28-year period of Chinese Communist Party revolution. Then we saw People Republic of China from Republic of China. Then there was second phase, 1949 to 1978, which can be recognized as a standing up period. Why standing up? Because during this period, there were a lot of crises which CCP was facing, right? Then we saw third phase in which they were getting rich. This was a period of economic liberalization, restructuring of Chinese economy. And finally, the fourth phase of China and the Communist Party, transition from getting rich to becoming powerful. Now this is the first phase being headed by Xi Jinping. So I hope this discussion opened some avenues in your understanding of Chinese Communist Party. First session is about taking a topic, contemporary issue, having discussion about its background, some of the important points, its evolution and its usage. And the second session, which is going to be held day after tomorrow, we are going to know how you can use this understanding in actually molding a good answer, because what matters for gaining marks is how you articulate your views. Sometimes students have a lot of articles, but what they lack and what they struggle with is how to integrate this particular knowledge in a meaningful answer, right? And sometimes many articles are of generic nature. So how to extract those points and make it relatable from PSI optional point of view. So this is the objective of this three video series, 3 sessions you can say. So in the second video, we are going to do application integration part of this particular issue only, okay, with new insights and new application. In the third session, that is Saturday, I'm going to have a live question answer session. Whatever you want to ask from China's 100 years of this Chinese Communist Party, you can ask questions. You have doubts, you can put those doubts, okay? So you're welcome to these sessions. If you liked, then you can share, you can put comment, so that we can make best out of these sessions and bring best out from ourselves for you. So keep learning, keep growing, take care. Shashank Tyagi signing off.